I stood in the middle of my grandfather's study, holding a letter I wasn't supposed to find, while my mother stood in the hallway outside telling my aunt that I would be handled by the end of the week. I was 31 years old. I had spent the last 4 years driving 2 hours each way, every single weekend, to help my grandparents. Grocery runs, doctor's appointments, sitting with my grandfather when the chemo made him too weak to lift his own water glass. My mother showed up twice in 4 years. My aunt, once, for Christmas, and only because she heard he'd started talking about updating the will. My grandfather passed on a Tuesday in early March. The funeral was on Friday. By Saturday morning, my mother had already contacted an attorney. I didn't know that yet. On Saturday morning, I was still at the house. His house, the one he'd built himself in 1987 on 12 acres outside of Asheville, North Carolina, washing dishes and trying to figure out how to feel. The reading of the will was scheduled for Monday. I wasn't worried. My grandfather had told me plainly 6 months before he died, "Adelaide, this house goes to you, everything goes to you, you earned it." His name was Ernest. Everyone called him Pop. He was 81 years old and the most deliberate man I have ever known. He did not say things he did not mean. Monday came. I sat in the attorney's office. A man named Mr. Whitfield, third-generation estate lawyer, same firm my grandfather had used for 40 years, and listened while he read. The house, the 12 acres, the investment portfolio. A classic 1969 Chevrolet Camaro that my grandfather had restored by hand and that was currently worth somewhere around $85,000. The savings accounts. All of it in a trust left to me. My mother sat across the table in a cream blazer she'd bought specifically for the occasion. I watched her face go from polite anticipation to something colder and harder when Mr. Whitfield said my name. My aunt, sitting beside her, put her hand flat on the table like she was steadying herself. Neither of them said anything in the office. They waited until we were in the parking lot. "He wasn't in his right mind," my mother said. Not to me, to my aunt, like I wasn't standing 4 feet away. We all saw it. "The last year he was confused. That's grounds for a challenge." I said. "He wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing." My mother looked at me the way she always looked at me when I said something she considered beneath her. "You manipulated a dying old man, Adelaide, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." I drove back to the house. I sat in my grandfather's armchair, the one that still smelled like him, like cedar and coffee, and I let myself cry for about 20 minutes. Then I stopped, because I knew my mother, and I knew that whatever was coming next, I needed to be ready for it. I didn't have to wait long. Wednesday, I got a call from Mr. Whitfield. My mother and aunt had filed a will contest, arguing that my grandfather lacked testamentary capacity and that I had exercised undue influence over him. They were also claiming that several items, including the Camaro and a set of antique pocket watches worth roughly $40,000, had been improperly transferred to me before his death, and they wanted those returned to the estate immediately. Mr. Whitfield told me not to panic. He said these challenges were common and that the burden of proof was on them. I didn't panic, but I started paying very close attention. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Ms. Hargrove, based in Asheville, who specialized in contested estates and who came recommended by a colleague of Mr. Whitfield's. She was small, 50-ish, and had the kind of calm that made you feel like the building could be on fire and she'd still be taking notes. "Tell me everything," she said, "from the beginning." So I did. I told her about the 4 years of weekends. I told her about the medical appointments and how I'd kept every single receipt, every single discharge summary, every single prescription pickup slip in a folder in my car, because my grandfather had asked me to, because he wanted records. I told her about the conversations he and I had about the will, including one that I had recorded on my phone, not because I expected this, but because he had asked me to. He'd said, "I want there to be no confusion when I'm gone." He was 80 years old and sharp as a tack, and he knew his daughters. Miss Hargrove looked at me over her reading glasses when I mentioned the recording. "Play it for me," she said. My grandfather's voice filled her office, clear, dated. He'd made me read the date aloud at the start, like a timestamp. He'd explained, in his own words, why he was leaving everything to me. He talked about my mother and aunt by name. He talked about their absence. He talked about what it had meant to him that I showed up, week after week, when no one else did. He said, "I am of sound mind, I know what I'm doing, and I don't want there to be any mistake about that." Ms. Hargrove set down her pen. "Adelaide," she said, "your grandfather was a very smart man." The will contest ground on for 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, my mother turned up the pressure in every direction she could find. She called my grandfather's neighbors. people who had known him for 30 years, and asked them to sign statements saying he'd seemed disoriented in his final months. Most of them refused. Two of them called me directly to tell me she'd called and to ask if I was okay. She contacted the hospice agency and requested his records, claiming she was a family representative. The agency told her to go through proper legal channels. She showed up at the house. I was there when she did. It was a Thursday afternoon, 6 weeks after the funeral, and I was on the back porch with a cup of coffee when I heard tires on the gravel. I walked around to the front and there was my mother's car, and behind it a pickup truck I didn't recognize. She got out. The man from the truck got out behind her. He was holding a clipboard. "We're here to do an inventory," my mother said. Like she had any right to be there, like this was already her house. "You're trespassing," I said. "This property is part of a contested estate. I have every right. You have no right. This property was placed in trust in my name. You are not on that trust, you are trespassing, and I'm asking you to leave." The man with the clipboard looked at my mother, she looked at me, and I looked right back at her. "I'm calling the sheriff," I said. "Right now." She left. But that night, she called my cousin, my mother's nephew who I'd always been close to, and told him that I had gone off the deep end and that the family was worried about my mental state. My cousin texted me an hour later with a screenshot of the message chain. He said, "I don't know what she's trying to do, but I think you should know." I forwarded it to Ms. Hargrove. 2 days later, I found out what she was trying to do. My mother had filed a petition for a mental health evaluation, essentially arguing that I was displaying erratic and hostile behavior, and requesting that a guardian ad litem be appointed to manage my affairs while the estate was in contest. She was trying to have me legally sidelined. She was trying to take away my ability to make decisions about my own life and my grandfather's property while the case wound through the courts. I read the filing at Ms. Hargrove's desk. I got to the part where my mother described me as emotionally unstable, socially isolated, and exhibiting signs of delusional thinking, and I had to set the papers down for a second. Miss Hargrove let me take a breath. Then she said, "This is a Hail Mary. It's expensive, it's aggressive, and it almost never works. But I want you to understand what she's doing. She's trying to run up your legal costs and exhaust you into settling." "I'm not settling," I said. "I know," she said, "so here's what we're going to do." Ms. Hargrove filed a motion to dismiss the guardianship petition, attaching an affidavit from my grandfather's primary care physician, Dr. Kellerman, who had treated him for 11 years, confirming that I had been his primary caregiver and that his medical team had consistently observed him to be lucid, engaged, and independent in his decision-making until the final weeks of his illness. She also attached statements from two of his neighbors, his hospice nurse, and the man who had maintained his property for the past decade. At the same time, she filed a counter-motion. Because while my mother had been running her campaign against me, Miss Hargrove had been doing something else. She'd been going through the estate financials, all the records, going back 10 years. And she had found something. My grandfather had set up a small secondary account about 7 years ago, around the time my aunt had gone through a divorce. He'd helped her out, transferred roughly $60,000 over the course of about 18 months. Normal enough. Except that after those transfers, the account had continued to be accessed. Smaller amounts, $2,000 here, $3,500 there. Accessed with a debit card linked to the account. My grandfather had not used that debit card. He didn't use debit cards. He wrote checks, Hargrove confirmed by pulling 3 years of his check register. Someone else had been using that card. Hargrove handed me a printout of the transactions. I looked at the dates and amounts and felt something cold move through me. "She's been taking money from him," I said. "For at least 3 years," Ms. Hargrove said. "Roughly $47,000 in total." My aunt, the one who hadn't shown up to help in 4 years, the one who was now claiming that I had manipulated a dying man. She had been quietly draining an account that my grandfather almost certainly didn't know was still being accessed. Miss Hargrove gave me a choice. We could use this in the civil proceeding as leverage, or we could report it directly to law enforcement and let it run its own course. The risk with using it as leverage was that it looked transactional. The advantage of reporting it directly was that it was the right thing to do, and not incidentally, it would change the entire landscape of the case. I reported it to law enforcement. I called the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday morning. I had Miss Hargrove on the phone with me. I was calm. I laid out what we had found, provided the documentation, and asked that a detective look into it. That one phone call. That one calm, quiet, 13-minute phone call. Within 10 days, a detective had opened a fraud investigation into my aunt. When that investigation opened, the bank flagged the account, which triggered a review of other accounts linked to my grandfather's estate. That review found that my aunt had also been named as a co-signatory on a certificate of deposit that my grandfather had opened in 2019, a CD he had explicitly removed her from in a 2021 amendment, according to Mr. Whitfield's records, and that a withdrawal had been made from that CD 3 weeks after my grandfather's death. She had withdrawn $22,000 from an account she had no legal right to access. After his death, the will contest collapsed the morning my aunt's attorney withdrew from the case. I got a text from Miss Hargrove at 8:14 a.m. on a Thursday. Their attorney filed a withdrawal of representation this morning. I expect a notice of voluntary dismissal by end of day. She was right. By 4 p.m. the contest was done. My aunt was charged with financial elder abuse and theft. The charges were filed under North Carolina's elder abuse statutes, and because the amount exceeded $10,000, the theft charge was a felony. She eventually pleaded guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for making full restitution $69,000, plus interest and legal fees. She paid it back over 3 years. My mother was not charged with a crime. What she did, the phone calls to neighbors, the attempt to have me evaluated, the intimidation, was ugly and calculated, but it wasn't illegal. She walked away from it. She still does not speak to me. I've thought about that a lot in the months since. Whether it bothers me. It doesn't, not the way she probably hoped it would, because here is what I know. My grandfather left me that house because I showed up. Not because I wanted something, not because I was positioning myself, but because he was sick and he needed someone and I was there. Every weekend for 4 years, I was there. I sat with him when he was scared. I drove him to appointments when he couldn't drive himself. I brought him soup and I watched bad television with him, and I listened to every story he ever wanted to tell, some of them more than once, and I was glad to do it. That was not a manipulation. That was love. And the house, his house, the one he built with his own hands on 12 acres of North Carolina mountain land, is mine now. The Camaro is in the garage. The antique watches are in a velvet box on the mantel. The armchair still smells a little like him, though that's fading now. I sit on the back porch on Sunday mornings with coffee the way he used to. The mountains are the same. The light comes in the same way. The neighbors still wave when they drive past, and sometimes they stop in for a few minutes to talk, and sometimes they tell me something about him I didn't know. I don't know if my mother expected to win. I think maybe she expected me to be too tired, too overwhelmed, too afraid of what fighting her would cost me. She miscalculated. She forgot that I had spent 4 years learning to show up even when it was hard. She forgot that I kept records. She forgot that my grandfather knew his daughters and loved me anyway and had thought ahead. She forgot that some people, when you come at them with everything you have, don't fold. They pick up the phone.